Hi there, Dave Sobel here, host of the Business of Tech podcast. I'm going to talk about SaaS management. It's a new emerging space. I'm super interested in it. We're going to talk about the name, what problem it solves. We're going to talk about why it's different from security or just identity, or why I think it's bigger than just cost management. A little bit about the keys to its success and some of the companies in this space. That's this episode of What I Tell Investors. So let's start out with what SaaS management is. We've got to start with what is SaaS, which should be pretty obvious to most of you. It's all those cloud-delivered services where you're not installing in software, you're just delivering the software as a service over the internet. Now, what this does is introduce some additional complexity for those organizations. Are they locked down correctly? Are you aware of all the systems that are being used? Are you being charged correctly? And if you've got an IT provider, generally, they're going to be the ones working with those systems, particularly in small business. Of course, in an enterprise or large mid-market, you might have an internal IT department that does this. But for the most small businesses and mid-market size companies, they're probably working with some kind of outsourcer. If you've been watching my videos, you're interested in the managed services space, which is the area that solves that problem. I've got other videos talking about managed services. But here, we're taking the perspective of those outsourced IT providers, and we're thinking about their needs. They used to be managing servers and desktops only. Those contained the systems that they were running. Now, they've got to think about all of these SaaS solutions. And that's the need for SaaS management. So, what problem does it solve? If you're an outsourced provider of IT services in the small to mid-market space, you're working with a diverse group of customers. Typical ones probably working with anywhere between 20 and say 60 customers on a regular basis. Some might be smaller, some might be larger. That's a great size to think about. What is happening here is each of those customers have their own SaaS applications. You've got to know which SaaS applications are out there. You need to help the customer make sure that they are using them properly, i.e. secured correctly, making sure that the right users are licensed, and that you're not being overcharged at each of those customer spots. Additionally, then you've got to make sure that you're managing all the security of it and have insight. And if you're trying to do it as a reseller, you've also got to have security controls around that too. That's the problem that SaaS management tools are looking to solve. Now, the obvious starting point is around security, right? Are these things configured correctly? Are they making sure that only the right users have access to the right information at the right time? But I think it's more than just that, because security doesn't take into account all of the ongoing pieces of cost management, as well as just making sure you're using the right services. Oftentimes when we think about security, we're talking about it from a breach or an external perspective. That's often also what customers jump to. I think it's larger than that because it's wholehearted management of these solutions. Most of the time, breaches happen because of some kind of internal piece or some kind of accident or users or misconfigurations, much more than just a targeted hacker coming specifically against the business. Now, that's not statistically quoted, but that's the kind of problem that I'm thinking about. So I think about it more from a management perspective than just security. And by the way, customers oftentimes assume security as opposed to knowing that you actually do have to do the management. So it's why I think this space is a little bit bigger than just security. I also see a lot of SaaS management solutions that jump to identity, that we've got to help manage identity across these solutions. And again, I think it's a little bit bigger. If you think about the things that I've just described, it has a lot to do with the data and the applications and not just the people and who's accessing. Don't get me wrong, I think that's an important piece, but identity management alone is not going to help us manage all of these various SaaS applications because we've got to do the other pieces too. So I think it's bigger than just identity. The other area that gets a lot of attention in SaaS management is cost management, making sure that you're only paying for the right stuff. Now, this is a big issue in the enterprise space, in particular because the size and scale becomes such a large bit that the drain on the organization of over-provisioning or overselling is a lot. In fact, there's some estimates that say it's about 30% of cost that can be reduced by proper cost management. And a lot of organizations start, particularly in that enterprise and large or mid-market space, start with cost management. But when I think about the typical SMB, cost management is a lot easier to manage. First off, you're not dealing with so many users at scale that it isn't immediately obvious. And from my perspective, SMBs tend to be somewhat cost sensitive. So they're very tied into their usage numbers a lot more closely than a typical enterprise. So oftentimes these enterprise tools that have started with cost management try and approach from that perspective. And I think it's bigger than that. It's not to say that's not important, but when I talk to the typical SMB, while they're sensitive to this, they're also much more attuned to it. So I don't think cost management is the number one piece. Now, here's what I think the key to success with this space is going to be, and it's about expandability. The interesting thing about SaaS is that it is so wide open. The moment we go beyond a few core applications, so for example, thinking about Microsoft 365 and Google Workplace, then we can probably jump to some of the storage solutions like Dropbox and Box and those management of storage spaces. We get into this much larger configuration of all of the various SaaS apps that can be used. In fact, it's so many, and in particularly in small businesses that will spin up these SaaS apps very easily, that problem is going to expand really quickly. For me, the indicator that I'm looking for in this space of somebody who's going to kind of get it is one that's going to be able to build an expandable platform for doing management of multiple kinds of SaaS apps. If you think about it, if they're going to have to go forward and do an integration to every single one of those SaaS apps, they'll never get there. But if they start looking at this from a platform perspective, and figure out a way to allow them to reach into those various SaaS applications in a standardized way, and allow those SaaS applications to come to their platform and plug in, those will be the ones that get interesting fast. Now, I think this is the Wild West. I don't think anybody's figured this out nor given a ton of thought to it. And there's lots of vendor reason for the SaaS applications to not be interested in doing kind of portability and interoperability because of that lock-in. So anybody that gets clever here, for me, is the number one feature that I'm looking for from a SaaS management platform. Now, there's lots of players in this space, and frankly, none of them have led with the feature that I'm looking for most. They're coming at it in lots of different ways. It's why I know that this is a Wild West, is that they're coming at it from a lot of different angles. Now, I'm going to name a couple. I do not think this list is even exhaustive. I'm keeping an eye on companies like SaaS Alerts, Nuvalex, Intellio, Augment, because they seem to be the ones that are starting at this from the service provider perspective. Now, I think some of them may be falling into the old tropes of, I will build an MSP program and the world will become great. I think they actually do need to differentiate more on a really smart technical implementation, particularly because the idea of I must be fully channel is breaking down a little bit in a very online world. Don't get me wrong, I'm a channel guy through and through, but I'm also realistic about the market that we sell in. Most customers can go and provision a lot of things on their own and do more than we like. In particular, that's why we have SaaS management problems. So I'm much more interested in their technical approach and the way their product engages and the power that it's going to unlock, because getting to that scale of as many SaaS applications as possible, that's going to be the trick for me on who's a true leader in this space. Now, in conclusion, this may seem a little bit more in the air and a little uncertain. It's why I like this space, is I don't actually think the requirements are fully baked. That's why I'm interested in what's going on in SaaS management, because it's such an interesting problem and it's the wave of the future. If you think about starting a typical business right now, you would be buying entirely SaaS applications. That's the way you're going to start up and the way you're going to engage. And we as IT services focused people do not have the tool set to properly manage that. I do think this is the opportunity that the traditional big four managed services providers have missed the boat on. They should have been leaders on here and aren't. But at this point, they're waiting to see how it plays out. I completely know they understand this problem, and they're waiting on somebody to buy to swoop up. So there's going to be some motivation for these companies to get going on it and to build something interesting, and one of those big four will probably buy them at some point. But we were going to be looking to the startups to have something happen. That's why I'm excited by the space. It's why I'm interested in SaaS management. But then one caveat. Whoever gets this right, I may not need the big four anymore, because I can actually do all of my SaaS management and applications without their traditional on-prem tools. It'll be an interesting new world. That's why I like the SaaS management space. Love to hear from you. If you've got thoughts and feedback, put them in the comments and let's have a conversation about it. Thanks for listening. If you like it, go ahead and hit like. Hit that subscribe button. I do a ton of material covering the IT services market, and I deliver a daily podcast called The Business of Tech, which is all the news about technology through the lens of those IT service providers. So if you're interested in learning more, you can listen to the issues that matter to them and go from there. There's videos here on the YouTube channel giving you insights into the kind of issues that they are providing and what they're thinking about in terms of the way they deliver their services. If you need more information, go ahead and visit mspradio.com. You can reach out and get in touch with me, and I'm always happy to answer more questions. Thanks for listening.